Welcome to English Easy Hub. Join us as we ignite the flames of your English learning journey together.
Please subscribe to watch and embark on your English learning journey. Don't miss out on the exciting content. The discussion delves into the fundamental question of whether language learners should prioritize individual words or complete sentences when building their skills. Through thoughtful exploration, the conversation highlights the importance of learning sentences as practical communication tools, understanding word usage and context, and balancing vocabulary acquisition with meaningful application.
Good afternoon, Professor. I've been thinking a lot about language learning, especially whether I should prioritize learning individual words or complete phrases in sentences. Could you share your insights on which approach might be more effective?
Good afternoon, Alex. That's an excellent question and a common dilemma among language learners. The short answer is that it depends on your goals and the context in which you are using the language. However, I lean towards prioritizing phrases and sentences because language is fundamentally about communication, and sentences are the building blocks of meaningful interactions.
That makes sense. So you're saying that learning sentences helps me communicate more naturally. But isn't it true that sentences are made up of words? Wouldn't mastering vocabulary first give me the tools to create sentences on my own?
You're absolutely right that sentences are composed of words. But here's the key. Words in isolation often lack the context that gives them meaning. For example, the word run has multiple meanings depending on the sentence. I run every morning versus the machine is running versus the paint is running. If you learn phrases or sentences, you naturally understand the context in which a word is used, which accelerates your ability to use it correctly.
That's interesting. So you're saying that sentences provide a kind of framework for understanding how words work together. But what if I only have limited time to study? Would it be better to focus on high-frequency words to build a foundation first?
A valid concern. Learning high-frequency words can indeed be beneficial, but even then, I'd suggest coupling those words with example sentences. For instance, instead of just memorizing the word important, you might learn it in the context of a sentence like, "It's important to practice every day." This way, you're not only remembering the word, but also understanding how it fits into real communication. It's a more efficient use of your time.
I see. So, even when focusing on vocabulary, incorporating examples is key. But I've noticed that some language apps and textbooks emphasize single words with translations. Isn't this a common and effective method?
It is common, but I'd argue it's only partially effective. Translation-based word learning can give you quick recall, but it doesn't necessarily help you internalize the word's usage or nuances. Think of language like a puzzle. Words are the pieces, but sentences are the assembled picture. Without seeing the bigger picture, you might struggle to know where a word fits.
That's a vivid analogy. But what about grammar? If I focus too much on memorizing sentences, wouldn't I miss out on understanding the rules that allow me to create my own sentences?
An excellent point, Alex. Grammar is indeed important, but the beauty of learning phrases and sentences is that you often absorb grammar patterns subconsciously. For example, if you consistently encounter sentences like, "I'm going to the store," you naturally understand subject-verb-object structure and the use of the present continuous tense. Later, when you study formal grammar, it serves as a way to refine and clarify what you already intuitively know.
That's fascinating. So you're suggesting that a sentence-first approach could make grammar learning less intimidating. But do you think this works for all learners? Some people might find sentence memorization overwhelming.
That's a fair observation. Every learner is different. For those who find sentence memorization daunting, I'd recommend starting with short, functional phrases like, "How are you?" or "What's your name?" These are manageable and immediately useful. Over time, as confidence builds, they can progress to more complex sentences. It's about creating a learning path that feels both achievable and meaningful.
I like that approach. But how do I ensure I'm actually retaining and using what I learn? Sometimes I feel like I forget sentences as quickly as I learn them.
Retention comes down to active engagement. Don't just passively read or repeat sentences. Use them. Write your own variations. Incorporate them into conversations. Or even create flashcards with context-rich examples. The more you actively use the language, the more deeply it embeds in your memory.
That's really helpful. So it's not just about what I learn but how I use it. One last question. Do you think there's a balance to be struck between words and sentences, or is one always more important?
Balance is key, Alex. While sentences should be your main focus for communication, individual words are indispensable for expanding your linguistic range. Think of it like building a house. Sentences are the walls and structure, while words are the bricks. Both are necessary, but it's the structure, the sentences, that makes the house functional.
That's a great perspective. Thank you, Professor. I feel like I have a much clearer idea of how to approach my studies now.
You're welcome, Alex. Keep asking such thoughtful questions. It's the sign of a dedicated learner. Remember, language learning is a journey, and every step you take brings you closer to fluency.
Professor, I've been reflecting on what you said about prioritizing sentences. But one challenge I often face is that sentences can feel too rigid, like I'm memorizing a script. How can I make this approach more flexible so I can adapt it to different situations?
That's an excellent observation, Alex. Memorizing sentences verbatim can indeed feel limiting. The key is to treat these sentences as templates rather than fixed scripts. For example, if you learn the sentence, "I'd like to order a coffee," you can adapt it by swapping out coffee for tea, juice, or any other item. This method allows you to internalize structures while leaving room for creativity and adaptability.
That's a good strategy. So it's less about repeating sentences word for word and more about understanding their patterns. But what if I get stuck in a situation where I don't know how to adapt?
That's where learning sentence fragments or chunks can be useful. Instead of memorizing full sentences all the time, focus on parts like "I'd like to" or "Can I have?" These chunks are versatile and can be combined with new words as needed. Think of them as building blocks for spontaneous communication.
I like that idea. Speaking of versatility, do you think focusing on idioms and common expressions is helpful? They're often full sentences, but they seem tricky because they don't always translate literally.
Idioms and expressions are incredibly useful for advanced learners, as they add richness to your language and help you sound more natural. However, they can be overwhelming for beginners because their meanings often aren't intuitive. My advice is to focus on high-frequency idioms that are directly applicable to your daily interactions. For instance, phrases like "it's up to you" or "I'll keep an eye on it" are both common and practical.
That makes sense. So start with the most useful ones rather than trying to learn every idiom I come across. But isn't there a risk of sounding unnatural if I rely too much on memorized phrases or idioms without fully understanding them?
That's a valid concern. Memorization without comprehension can lead to awkwardness. That's why context is so important. When you learn a phrase, pay attention to where and how it's used. For instance, "break a leg" is encouraging before a performance, but would sound odd in a casual conversation about sports. Immersing yourself in authentic language sources, like movies or conversations, can help you develop a feel for when and where to use certain expressions.
Immersion sounds like a great idea, but I often feel overwhelmed by the sheer volume of new words and phrases I encounter. How do I decide which ones to focus on?
Prioritization is essential, Alex. Focus on the language that aligns with your goals. If your priority is travel, concentrate on travel-related phrases like, how much does this cost? Or where is the train station? If it's professional communication, learn phrases related to meetings, presentations, or emails. Tailoring your learning to your immediate needs keeps it relevant and manageable.
That's helpful. But what about words that seem to pop up everywhere, like get or take? They appear in so many phrases and expressions that it's hard to pin down their meanings. How should I approach these kinds of words?
Those are called polysemous words, words with multiple meanings. They're common in English and can be tricky at first. The best way to tackle them is through examples and context. Instead of trying to memorize every possible meaning of get, focus on high-frequency phrases like get up, get ready, or get along. As you encounter more examples, your understanding will naturally deepen.
So context is the key once again. But isn't it risky to rely too heavily on context? What if I misinterpret something because I don't know enough about the culture behind the language?
That's a sharp insight, Alex. Cultural understanding is indeed a critical part of language learning. For instance, if you hear someone say, let's grab lunch, you might assume it's just about eating, but culturally, it's often an informal way of suggesting a meeting or catching up. To bridge this gap, try to engage with cultural materials, watch shows, read articles, or even talk to native speakers. Cultural immersion will help you interpret language more accurately.
Thank you, Professor. This conversation has given me so much clarity and motivation. I'll start applying these strategies right away and come back with more questions as I progress.
You're most welcome, Alex. I look forward to hearing about your progress. Keep up the great work, and remember, every effort you make is building your language foundation stronger.
The dialogue emphasizes that prioritizing sentences over isolated words fosters more natural and effective communication. Key takeaways include the value of treating sentences as adaptable templates, leveraging context to master vocabulary, and immersing oneself in cultural nuances. Patience and consistent practice are essential, as every step forward strengthens the learner's foundation and brings them closer to fluency.
Thanks for watching. Remember to subscribe, like, comment, and share to keep the English learning journey alive.